Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the closing artist panel for American Sunrise here at Crystal Bridges. My name is Ashley Holland. I am the curator and director of curatorial initiatives with Art Bridges, which is not Crystal Bridges, but a sister organization. And we are here today to celebrate this incredible moment at Crystal Bridges. And I just want to start off by acknowledging all of the artists that are in this show. If you are an artist, both the panelists as well as in the audience, please raise your hand, stand up, cheer, do whatever. We are so excited to have you. Yay, there we go, yeah. So there are 30 artists in this incredible show, and it spans 150 years of Native art. And something that both Art Bridges and Crystal Bridges is committed to is the idea that there is no American art without Native art. And that doesn't mean that Native art has to figure out its place in American art. It means that American art has to figure out how to decenter itself and to think beyond a Euro-American scope. And I think that this show is really doing that, and there are so many wonderful moments of decolonial practices, Indigenous knowledge really being incorporated into the show. But we can start with the title, American Sunrise. This comes from the 2019 novel by Joy Harjo, who will be here tomorrow giving a talk at 4 p.m. Make sure that you do not miss that. But it really is thinking about the centering of Indigenous knowledge, about Indigenous histories, past, present, and future, and that feeds into the themes of Indigenous kinship, placemaking, and futurism, sorry. So, other events, you don't want to miss them. Tomorrow, we also have the Cherokee Nation Film Festival from 11 to 2 over at the Mo, as well as Joy Harjo, and it is just going to be an incredible weekend that is helping to send this American Sunrise into the sunset. But I also want to call out the people that helped with this show. This is not just about art, it is also about language. We incorporated Indigenous languages in. We have Chris Cote, we have, I don't think Roy Boney is here, but Roy Boney, who will be here tomorrow for the panel at the Cherokee Film Festival. And those are really important moments of inclusion within this space. And then, of course, the idea of acquisitions. You cannot just bring Native art into the galleries. You have to also make the commitment to collecting them and adding them. So there are so many great new acquisitions within this show. And then there's also great moments such as the Yatika Harjo piece that as you go out into that outdoor area, you really have this beautiful moment. So without further ado, I also want to thank the Terra Foundation who made this all possible and has allowed us to bring these artists in and for these great moments. But I am going to turn it over to this incredible panel, and they will talk more.
Thank you, Ashley. Oh, okay, here, I'll pass this down. Thank you. We have one chair up here. I see some folks filtering in, so if you're still looking for a space, we have one chair here. I'm looking at some of our visitors in the back who traveled a long way to be with us today. But as Ashley, the co-curator for American Sunrise, mentioned, this is such a phenomenal moment that we get to come together and celebrate the closing of this exhibition and join in dialogue with the artists whose work is in our collection, some are in the show, and really get into conversation. So before we start, Ashley mentioned Indigenous curatorial practices and methodologies being one of the foundational pillars of this exhibition. We're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves so we can start in a good way. So Yatika, do you want to begin? And then I'll be last.
Sounds good. Hawe Estangosio. My name's Yatika Starr Fields. I'm Osage, Mvskoke, and Cherokee. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I'm a colorist, painter, materialist. I appreciate a lot of materials that I work with in my compositions and art making process, and it's always an experimentation in where I go with it. But I'm always trying to discuss a deeper dialogue and kind of what this exhibition encompasses, the American Sunrise, the American histories in the past with that, and I try to find new solutions and resolutions within my work. I think on the other side of here I have a painting over here, and so that's my work in this exhibition, but I'm happy to be here with these amazing artists here. Congrats to all you all. They have some amazing works and exhibitions going on at the moment, so I just want to congratulate them. Jordan, congratulations on the exhibition. So it's coming from Tulsa and here, having this exhibition here is really special and spectacular. It's something that I think is definitely is needed for this area in northwestern Arkansas, but also northeastern Oklahoma to kind of really create the impact and conversations of the history here, you know, whether it's the stories, but also to implement that in the foundations of these institutions and museums, such as the Crystal Bridges Museum. So I'm happy to talk and share my process and stories and engage in dialogue with everyone here. So thank you.
Yehiatsin, Yuchat Duasak, Pluknahadi Hatsati, Kagwantan Yadi Ayachat Shikakwan. I'm Yehiatsin, Nicholas Galanin, Tlingit-Unangax, children of the Kagwantan, from the Pluknahadi Raven Coho House in Sitka and Sitka, Alaska. Really grateful to be here to see some artists I admire and have known for some time, but we don't always cross each other's paths. So this is a really special moment to be joined with you all and to share some thoughts and ideas. So goodness sheesh, thanks for coming.
Mark Michaelis, Nuk Cara Romero Niega, Nuk Nu, Nuk Patsats, Nuk Papao, Hagaruyu. My name is Cara Romero. I'm a contemporary fine art photographer. It's really nice to see so many friendly, familiar faces in the audience. I'm really excited to be here at Crystal Bridges, to be bringing Indigenous dialogue to American art. And I'm really delighted to be on the panel with two people I admire so much, and for you putting this beautiful show together and co-curating with Ashley. It's a really important exhibit that I got to see for the first time yesterday, and I'm still processing that 150 years of the arc of our American art history as Native people. So thank you for having me, having us, and it's nice to be here.
Deonde babon, deonde batsan, dom toyak oy ma akan, toy baga, paddle tika, big up nado, and malua dalava. I'm Jordan Poorman Cocker, curator of Indigenous art here at Crystal Bridges, and co-curator of the show with Ashley Holland. And welcome to everyone who just walked in. We had a wave of artists, some traveling hours and taking time out of their lives, some traveling more than 12 hours to come visit this incredible show and join in celebration. So welcome everyone. Let's dive in. So this exhibition is really sort of folding in the words of Joy Harjo to help frame a dialogue around this question of how do our connections to art and place reshape what we know about America and about ourselves. And so I have a question. I want to start with Yatika. You mentioned your work, Osage Memories, which is on view around the corner in this first corridor. I know that much of your work, especially from this period, really delves into time and material culture and this sort of idea of what it means to hold those art practices across time. Can you talk a little bit about time in relation to Osage Memories or other works?
Yeah, thank you for the question. What comes to mind first is, I would say, family and kind of a passed down approach to making. And then I think about regalia and what we wear in ceremonies. When we dance, when I look down and see the ribbon work or patterns or stitching that's on these items, on these regalia and these beautiful pieces, and that's a certain lineage of story handed down from one generation to the other. And those are beautiful memories because you're raised in these events, you're raised in these ceremonies, you're raised in these ways and rhythms. And when it comes to that specific work and then that kind of body of work that I was doing, and it still comes up often, is this approach to painting the physicality of it, the motion of it, the spontaneity of it that arrives from those memories, I think, coming from that passed down generational stories and knowledge in that making of that. And that's really beautiful, and I think that's something that's specific to me and who I am and where I'm from and what I was raised into. And then that translates into my current work. It's kind of how I approach my process and how I look into the future and what I'm thinking about in work and what I can help bring to the forefront with my color and usage of that, but it's a translation from that story, if that makes sense. So Osage Memory, that painting, is kind of a depiction of that in one composition of movement, really. It's a story of the past, it's a story of our family and peoples, compiled into color and layers and composition. And then I bring it to you to try to enjoy, not really to find a solution or depict, but just to kind of feel the sensation that maybe I feel that is something special, and it's only because of that passed down knowledge and lineage that I have been accustomed to or afforded to in my lifetime. That's something really special and beautiful that not everyone gets to have, but if I can share that in my work, then I think that's a beautiful aspect to it. So.
Thank you. I think that's one of my favorite things about your work is this sort of relationship between what we hold, what we carry, and that movement. And I think even for folks who may not be familiar with the items that are, part of that painting, part of that composition in detail, that sense of aliveness is really critical. And of course, we know that Crystal Bridges in Northwest Arkansas is sited on Osage, Caddo, and Quapaw ancestral and treaty territory. So it's a really important work in the show for many reasons. But that intersection to place and sort of reminder of that vitality and resilience is critical. I have a question for you, Nick. I know we don't have any works in this show, but we recently collected several new works from you. Can you talk about this sort of idea of contending with material culture and bringing together different threads that really resist historical narratives or maybe chronology as a confine, and thinking through your latest bronze? I think it goes like this: Memory and Interference, where you're sort of bringing this conversation of carving and bronze sculpture.
Sure. So the work that we're speaking towards right now is one that's going to be installed
January.
In January, okay, yeah, in January. So it's a bronze figure. It's one of the more recent bronze works that I've done. One of the first figures. I'm trained as a totem carver, kutia, in my community, so wood carver, and I still do that work. If you're familiar with Alaska and our cultural visual language, the iconography that is most stereotyped, I suppose, is the totem pole is definitely one of those. In that training, there's understandings of, for me, it's continuum. It's breathing, living culture. It's continuum. My great-grandfather did this work in the early 1900s. My uncle, my father. I'm part of that timeline. So I still relate that language to work being created today. Early on in my career, I found that the stereotyping of our community was so common and blatant and lazy. And there was an economy that had been created around replicating these totemic forms and selling them to like what is like the tourist economy right now. And so I work with those materials in this conversation. I work with these materials in representing our experience now. Early on, I realized that within those stereotypes and romanticized versions of ourselves, we weren't allowed to experience the world today and to speak towards it with our work. And so this bronze, for me, does some of that. It's created out of chopped, Indonesian carved replicas of totems that are sold as curio to tourists. Basically, it's a form of consuming us without us being attached to it in any form. And I make that work indigenous again by creating these forms and these bronzes. So.
Thank you. And I think this is something that's really maybe an additional layer to some of the works on view. Several of our artists who have commissioned works that are new to the collection and some that are ongoing and not yet fully realized are here with us today. And I think one of the strengths of this exhibition is really thinking through that materiality and that sort of process of intergenerational making, and really thinking deeply about what remains and what we carry from one generation to the next. We have some really beautiful works on view. In our first discussion, which some of our audience was here for, that took place during the opening, we heard from matriarchs and elders, Jerry Redcorn, Terry Greaves, Lily Van, who is an incredible ceramicist. And we were really thinking through this conversation of what's carried and how is it carried. And what I appreciate about what you shared, Nick, was is that there can also be critique, and that critique is also beautiful. And I think that your work does this really well. And so thinking about futurism and speaking about material culture and works that really pull from different reference points. Cara, we have the Zenith on view in this gallery, which is an exciting new work and a playful work. Can you talk a little bit about this work, how you made it, and maybe some of the messaging that you hope folks take away?
Sure. So I made the Zenith, I think it was in 2023, 2022, I take that back. And I was really looking at this movement of Native futurism that was emerging in our arc of Native American art history. And I think a lot of Native Americans from my generation come out of parents in the American Indian movement that the mantra was, we're still here, right? And so there's been this pressing with even becoming a photographer at a young age to reclaim presence in our absence, like this experienced absence from media, from academia. And so here we are stepping into this idea of futurism where we're imagining ourselves in the future. And this is powerful to me. This is like, we're still going to be here. So it's like the next step. And I think as we think about those things as Native people, we have this schism that we experience everywhere with a foot in both worlds, right? We have our cultural privacy, our passive resistance that we hold on to back home so that we can transmit culture without persecution, so that we can keep foodways. And so when we're faced with contemporary news about how fast our technology is going to be and how fast our cars and more big energy and more resource extraction. These are the things that really we've been fighting for 500 years. This is why you're seeing Native people on the front lines of, every environmental movement, whether they're water protectors, because it's really the very, very old things that are the most important to our community. So it's form lines that have been passed down through thousands of years. It's what's bundled in the regalia making, right? These are the things that we're protecting. They're part of our ecosystems. We're part of our ecosystems. And so the whole series that I worked on towards this, they're very fun. They're pulling on ideas of space and astronauts and, pop culture reference to speculative futurism and sci-fi, but they're really centering heirloom corn, right? Because where are we truly as a people if we're not saving the things that have been around for thousands of years, that we've been protecting for thousands of years? And so it is very playful. The making of the pieces is, my favorite part of being an adult is using my imagination. It's coming together in community around these stories. This features George Alexander. He's Mvskoke Creek. People that center culture around corn as well, and we strung up all of the individual corns. The heirloom corn came from Cochiti, my husband's tribe, and so we went down with a truck and threw the dried corn in the back of the truck and brought it up to the studio and strung it up for hours by fishing line. And George came in with his high altitude helmet and his leisure suit, and the rest is part of American Sunrise. So.
I love that. And, when we were thinking about this exhibition and thinking about some of these histories that folks may be less aware of, or folks may be learning in some cases for the first time, we also talked about the importance of joy and humor and curiosity in delivering those stories. And I think this work is such an important sort of anchor in the exhibition because it delivers just that, while also teaching in this really capacious way. And you have your first major solo exhibition on right now, Panu Pulugai, at the Hood Museum. So if anyone is near Dartmouth College, please go see Cara Romero's exhibition there. Round of applause. Phenomenal. I want to circle back, just sort of springboarding off of this conversation around joy and what we carry with us to Yatika. I know that your work takes many forms, and the painting that we have in collection is just one of them, and you've most recently been working with textiles, which is part of your mother's artistic practice, as well as a part of this broader sort of cultural heritage. Can you talk about maybe what you're working on now in the exhibition Home as It Was on view at Garth Greenham?
Yes, beautiful words. And before I jump into that, answer that question, is just, the work in here, it's a culmination of all that, of activism, of joy, of history and knowledge, and that's something that's really powerful that I see in here that is unique to a lot of the other work in this museum. It really stands out because it holds this really strong presence of this knowledge and history that I think is necessary for us to understand and learn and be a part and hold. So, it's just a special exhibition. With this new work that I'm creating, I just had an exhibition open up in New York at Garth Greenham Gallery. My second solo show with them, and it's a new body of work using and utilizing tent material to create plain-style shields from the 1800s. And the shields that you might recognize or know today will be in history books or in museums, in archives, and collections. And for me to create this work, it stems off another body of work that I've been working on the past 5 years called Tent Metaphor Series, which is something that I started after living in the Pacific Northwest for a while and seeing the homeless encampments, and then going to Standing Rock and being a part of that for a couple of months out there, and seeing tents used in this way to protect our humanity and who we are, and to really protect our spirit. and our resilience, and to fight for ourselves and our histories and our people and our sovereignty. And I made a body of work that kind of discusses the duality of those two things in the politics of America, whether it's homeless encampments or protest encampments. And then it kind of shifted to Oklahoma and the Oklahoma flag, where it's an Osage shield on it. But within that, there's a peace pipe and an olive branch. And I kind of wanted to talk about that as an Osage artist, and maybe as a form of reclamation. As we know in Oklahoma, we fight with our politics and who we are as sovereign people, and to have our rights protected and really respected. And from what I see on that flag, that's almost disrespect to who we are as a people. So I wanted to make work about that in paintings. And then I wanted to take it one step further with this new work to utilize those tent pieces that I had from Tent Metaphor series and make actual shields out of tent materials. Some were from encampments that were cleaned, and then some were off online. But using the material, I wanted to really discuss what tents and what that material is to me today in the American context, in the world context, and really talk about displacement, cultural displacement, ecological disaster displacement, things like that. And then how do we look at that and how do we protect that? That's our humanity. These are really important aspects to our livelihood. It's just like the corn, the heirloom corn, it's just like Nick was talking about, with the stereotypes, the reclamation of this. It's we can't see it, but it's displacing our spiritual aspect of who we are. And so these pieces that I made really dive into that, using the material of tent material to talk about the fragility of how people are utilizing these tents, these forms to protect their humanity, their spirituality, and their knowledge of their culture that's kind of being raptured in this world today. So, and the shield, as we know, is something that protects the person, it protects the community, it protects the culture that represents, that warrior or woman holds. And so these tents made out of tent material are aspects of that. How do we protect ourselves today, with the nod to history of where we're from, where I'm from.
So as Yatika mentioned, this show is open in New York City, home as it was. So if you're in the city, please go visit. A round of applause. I think it's really exciting. I think you've touched on something really important about contemporaneity and about the ways this exhibition really intentionally broke apart chronology as an approach to curation and really embraced transhistorical versions and Indigenous ways of knowing and doing, because there is a timelessness about some of these experiences, and certainly a timelessness about these art forms and the ways that they're sort of reiterated one generation to the next and reconstituted, but also gently sort of passed between knowledge keepers. And so I wanted to kind of circle back, Nick, to see if you wanted to respond to some of the points that have been made within the scope of your work or even within the scope of the show as a response.
Sure. I think the use of chronology in context of institution is something we're so familiar with. I feel like it's been a tool that's preserved a form or version of authenticity to our existence and allowance of existing in the world today. So I think expressing other forms of versions of time and acknowledging other calendars and clocks is super important to our Indigenous communities, especially when we speak about our experience, when we speak about our relationship to place, when we speak about seasons. So right now in Sheepka, the herring are returning, like literally this week. And that's when our lands and our oceans come alive from, sometimes a cold, long winter, and there's everything shows up, the whales, the sea lions, the birds, and it kind of starts off our harvesting season. So I think of time in context to our relationship and knowledge and understanding and our spiritual understanding and connection to place that capitalist clocks can't really translate or keep, and that approach to our work and our conversations and our work in a space like an exhibition is so important. I feel like it's a real way to do things and understand things. So I don't know if that's going too far here, what we're talking about.
No, it's spot on.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, what feels important with this exhibition is also to sort of encourage that multiple directional looking. So we're thinking about the past, we're thinking about the present, but we're also very intentionally, as with the Zenith, thinking about the future and proposing ways that Native people can exist and will exist in a time that, hasn't happened yet. So I appreciate that. Something I want to kind of pull back to is this theme that's really present within the show, which is kinship. So we talked early on about kinship as being something that can be between people, genealogical kinship, as we've heard a little bit about today, but also to materiality. And Cara, I know your work with photography is so important in sort of repositioning Indigenous gaze, maybe internally, and it's important for audiences who may have a very specific set of reference images for Native Americans. So can you talk a little bit about the role of photography and your work in encouraging new ways of looking and seeing?
So I grew up in a community where basket weavers, we collect along with the seasons, and we had shoe boxes of photos. And these shoe boxes of photos, I would pour through them. There's always like kind of one person in the family that's the keeper of the family tree, or, the keeper of the stories. And I left the reservation at a pretty early age, and I never saw another photo like the ones in the shoebox back home. And they spoke to a lived experience of the last, 80, 100 years that was all but gone. And, Native photography, even after I decided that that's what I wanted to do with my pursuit of craft and medium, there was not very much reference other than ethnographic photography from the turn of the century, which was really, really beautiful. Our communities rely on the work of the ethnographic photographers to connect with our great-grandparents, sometimes 3 generations back. But I think the danger in only relying on that body of work is that it captured the world's imagination and stopped time, right? This is a medium that has a hyper reality to it. And so when you start to go down this road of what are the dangers, I think about being a young person and, coming from stories of boarding school, of relocation, of termination era, of forced assimilation, forced acculturation, all of these things, and we don't look anything like these pictures, And so it does something to a young person's self-esteem. In my opinion, it does something to our young generation's self-esteem to say, if you don't look like this, then you're not a good Indian, And so you have this medium that I think we pick up a lot of the different art mediums in our formal training, and our goal is to indigenize it. How can we be in service to our community? How can we turn this idea of fine art around and use our platforms to do good, to throw away linear time, like what you're talking about, and say, you know, how do we bring our indigeneity through time, you know, and how do we look as contemporary Indigenous peoples, and how do our stories appear in contemporary times? And, you know, sometimes our stories are supernatural, and sometimes our stories are passed down from grandparents and they're very real, you know, but we're really trying to keep those things alive. I think to be a photographer, especially in the 90s, you know, a Native American photographer in the 90s, you know, there were a few people. I was fortunate enough to go to the Institute of American Indian Arts, and so I got to study our own art history. And without that, I knew so little. But it was stumbling upon people's work like Shelley Nero or Zig Jackson or Lee Marmon, where there was that sense of humor. There was that nuance. There was something comforting about seeing these images that reminded me of the shoebox of photos back home, that had a reflection of self or of family, you know. And so it was all I ever really wanted to do, but I really felt like an outsider. I felt like an outsider to American art, right? Because there wasn't a lot of reference for Native American photography. I felt like an outsider to my own community. You know, that's kind of real talk. You know, I really just kept pushing through because, you know, I think our art practices and our creative journeys are really between, you know, ourselves and creator. And so you have to just, you know, keep pushing through. And that's kind of, you know, I guess it took me further than I ever imagined, you know, to be a fine art photographer, but I feel like there's so many stories left to tell. And I enjoy it so much, and so I'll just keep doing it.
Yes, round of applause. Okay, thank you for that. I think you're really unpacking something that shows up around each sort of section of this exhibition, which is the emotive part of looking at art and experiencing art, and the thing that happens in your body when you're looking at something beautiful and something intentional. And going back to sort of the framing of the exhibition, we really thought deeply about poetry and words as a way to kindle or rekindle those emotive experiences. So we have a quote behind us by Joy Harjo, which is pulled from An American Sunrise: "May we all find the way home." And I think part of the exhibition is also fostering that empathy and universality and recognizing, you know, and appreciating what's in front of us in a way that could be educational for some, but also in a way that could be healing. So in our talk yesterday, Nick, we talked a little bit about that sort of role of resilience within your work, and the importance of mentorship and, you know, your role as a carver and learning this art form from your father and for many generations going back. Can you speak to that sort of factor of resilience and mentorship and the role that sort of plays in your work?
Yeah, so understanding the climate that we create in, and the now, even in the past, looking at eras where, like, George Benson, who was my great-grandfather, his clique name's Klena, was working in cultural work in a time period where it was not allowed in a time period where not far after our ceremonies and our kuik, our potlatch, was illegal. Following a time period where, and this speaks towards that bronze work too of the process of chopping, where our objects, our ceremonial, our cultural, our atu is what we call it, which translates roughly to something that belongs to your grandchildren's children or something. It's not a form of ownership that personally we would have. Or those things were removed and placed into institutional spaces. Understanding these timelines and these conversations became a form of responsibility when I was provided and born into a family that is creating cultural work. It also offered an opportunity for me to understand and you know, we learn and educate ourselves on our culture that we're surrounded by. And so it was a way in to connection, really, because that's what it is. It's connection to place. It's connection to time and land, and we get to hold it right now, and then, you know, hopefully have not like consumed it while we're holding it. We're contributing to something that other generations get access to. So mentorship is an enormously important part of survival, of passing and sharing knowledge. I refer to this work as, well, life work, but I also refer to it as representation of a living culture and community. In contrast to, and I use the kutia or the totem as a object to tell the story, I suppose. And one is that the preservation of that in museums or institutional spaces now is temperature and humidity control and maybe arsenic to keep whatever the bugs are from eating the material of that object, so that it can preserve this idea of this image. But the real care is caring for the community that has that information and that knowledge and that connection. The real care is continuing those projects and having opportunities for other generations of artists to get experience so that they can live and be connected and taught these things that are embedded within the work. So.
Thank you. Yes, that's so important. And I think that's something that, don't mind my phone. That's something that I think is important for broader audiences to have an awareness of, is that Indigenous people did keep, create, and house items, and we have our own forms of care, and sometimes that includes allowing an item to have a lifespan and not preserving it or encasing it or enshrining it forever. Thank you for that. And Yatika, I had a similar question for you. I know your mother, Anita Fields' work is in our collection, and your father, Tom Fields, is an incredible photographer. Ngozi Fields is a incredible violinist. And Welena Fields actually wrote a label for this exhibition, which we worked with Osage Nation, Chris Cote, to translate into Wajaji'ia to the Osage language. Tell me about that influence and what it's, how that's sort of woven into your work, the influence of artists, and maybe even your family specifically.
I think I'll talk about it in a broader sense and a whole, because when I know a lot of the artists in here. Being a Native artist, it's a small community. We all know, what everyone's doing and where everyone's at with it, and that's a beautiful thing about it. And within each of these artists, they come from a family, just like we're talking about here. And I want to go back to mentorship, because it's not only maybe like a physical mentorship aspect, but it's like a memory of mentorship. Like, I remember a story with Zig Jackson one time. I was with my dad in San Francisco, and we went to this Picasso exhibition, and I was like, I really want that poster, this sign that's outside. and it wasn't for the taking, but Zig Jackson was like, hey man, here, I'll help you. And if you're not familiar with Zig Jackson's photography, you should look at it because it's powerful. It's one of those photographers and imagery that really encapsulates who we are as Indigenous people in black and white, and just like the firm availability of like our stance on our homelands, you know. And he was the forefront in photography, really reclaiming that narrative, just like Cara was mentioning that she does with her work. So it's not like it's just like my singular family, but everyone has this family. All of us, every artist that's in here has a story from a family of their artistic household, and it's passed down to them, and it's translated in the works. You know, every piece in here holds that family lineage and knowledge, and that's the truth, and that's something that's really beautiful, and that's something that I see from every artist in here. So for me to grow up in that way, it was a way of life, you know, and I'm really fortunate to have that in my life, and I'm really happy to acknowledge that, because in my work that I create, it comes out fully, and I've embraced it as something such, knowing that I come from it. And I've had to learn along the way in my life, just like everyone does in their lifetime, who they are and maybe their direction in life and what works and what doesn't. And within my work specific in my process, it's to understand that and to not really delineate from it, but just accept it and really feel the beauty of that and let it come out in the ways that it does, with whether that's paintbrush or sewing, and things like that, or conversation and dialogue, you know. So it's something that I see in a lot of families, you know, and that's something that's really special. That's something that what makes contemporary Native art so powerful and so important, and I don't want to say raw, but real, you know. Something that I think a lot of American art omits, because they're trying to like create a culture when we have a culture, you know. And that's like in the work, that's a stronghold, that's embedded in it, that's embedded in the clay, you know. So, and yeah, so I'm really like stoked and thankful that I could grow up in that aspect, and that my family also, you know, celebrates that too, like my brother and sister, and they know that. But it's fleeting, you know, these things like that. So we appreciate it in the time being, and work with it, and make it, mentor, and just develop it. Mm-hmm. So.
Thank you so much for coming to our panel today. I hope you join us tomorrow for more programming around American Sunrise, and enjoy the last day or so of this show. Thank you.